If God knows all of our choices before we make them, how can they truly be free? Does his omniscience mean that our lives are predetermined, like a story where the ending is already written? The idea that God knows everything, past, present, and future, can seem to contradict the notion of free will. After all, if God already knows what you will choose, does that mean you had no real choice to begin with? However, this understanding comes from a misunderstanding of what it means for God to know. God's omniscience isn't about forcing or determining your actions. Instead, it's a reflection of his infinite understanding. Think of it this way. Knowledge of an event doesn't cause the event to happen. Imagine watching a recording of a soccer game. Even though you already know the outcome, your knowledge doesn't influence the player's actions during the game. Similarly, God's knowledge of your choices exists outside of time and doesn't interfere with your ability to make them. The confusion often arises from trying to apply human limitations to God. In our experience, knowledge and causation are tightly connected. If someone tells you what to do, their knowledge influences your action. But God's knowledge is not like human foreknowledge. It doesn't operate within time. He sees past, present, and future simultaneously, which means his understanding of your choices exists alongside your freedom to make them. To understand this better, consider the difference between seeing and causing. If you stand on a hill and see a car approaching a curve too fast, you might predict that it will skid. Your foresight doesn't cause the car to lose control. The driver's choices and the conditions of the road do. God's knowledge of your life works in a similar way. He observes your choices but doesn't dictate them. This leads us to a deeper truth. God's omniscience and human free will are not opposites, but coexist. His knowledge reveals the depth of his wisdom, while your freedom reflects the value he places on authentic relationships. Your choices matter, not because God needs to be informed, but because he desires a genuine connection with you. If God exists outside of time and sees the past, present, and future as one eternal moment, does that resolve the tension between his omniscience and our free will? Or does his timeless perspective still challenge the idea that we can choose freely? To understand this, we need to explore what it means for God to exist beyond time. Unlike humans, who experience life moment by moment, God's perspective isn't bound by sequential time. Imagine standing on a hill, looking down at a parade. You can see the beginning, middle, and end of the procession all at once. The participants, however, experience each part of the parade one step at a time. This analogy illustrates how God observes time. He sees the entirety of history and the future simultaneously, without being confined to its flow. But how does this relate to free will? If God sees all our actions at once, does that mean we are merely actors following a predetermined script? Not at all. God's observation of our choices doesn't eliminate our ability to make them freely. His timeless knowledge is descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, God knows what will happen because he sees it, not because he forces it to happen. Think of a parent watching their child make a decision. The parent might have enough understanding of the child's personality to predict their choice, but this foresight doesn't remove the child's agency. Similarly, God's awareness of your future decisions comes from his eternal perspective, not from a coercive will. This idea also deepens our understanding of God's character. His timeless nature means that he doesn't simply predict or guess. He knows with perfect clarity. Yet, in this knowledge, he still respects our freedom. He doesn't intervene to overwrite our decisions, even though he has the power to do so. Instead, he allows us to choose, giving our actions real significance. Ultimately, God's perspective on time highlights the beauty of his relationship with humanity. He sees all possibilities, all outcomes, and all consequences, yet he invites us to participate fully in his creation. Our choices matter, not because they surprise him, but because they are integral to the story he is writing with us, a story where free will and divine sovereignty coexist in perfect harmony. If God knows certain individuals will reject him, why create them in the first place? Isn't it cruel to bring someone into existence knowing they will face eternal separation from him? This question strikes at the heart of God's nature and the purpose of free will. To understand why God creates those who he knows will ultimately reject him, we must first grasp the value he places on genuine freedom and love. Love, at its core, must be a choice. If God only created beings who were guaranteed to love him, their love wouldn't be real. It would be compelled, like a machine programmed to respond in a specific way. True love requires the possibility of rejection. God values this authentic love so deeply that he grants us the freedom to choose or reject a relationship with him, even knowing that some will turn away. But does this mean God is indifferent to those who choose to reject him? Far from it. God's desire is that everyone would choose life, hope, and a relationship with him. The Bible repeatedly shows his patience and longing for people to turn to him, even when they resist. In fact, his knowledge of who will be lost doesn't diminish his love for them. He reaches out, offering grace and countless opportunities to change course. Consider also the ripple effects of every life. Even those who reject God can influence others in ways that lead to greater good. Think of someone who might inspire another to seek God through their struggles or actions, even if they themselves don't choose him. Every life plays a role in the grand tapestry of creation, and God's wisdom ensures that each thread has purpose and meaning, even when we can't fully see it. Finally, the tension between divine foreknowledge and human choice reminds us that God's ways are higher than ours. We may struggle to reconcile why he would allow certain outcomes, but this doesn't negate his goodness or justice. Instead, it calls us to trust that his ultimate plan is one of redemption, where every choice, whether for or against him, serves a purpose in the grand design. So why does God create those he knows will reject him? Because the freedom to choose is essential to love, and because every life, even one that turns away, holds meaning in his eternal perspective. His love remains constant, even in the face of rejection, offering a path back to him until the very end. Free will allows us to love, but it also holds us accountable for our choices, including eternal consequences. Is this truly a gift that elevates us, or is it an unbearable burden placed upon humanity? Free will is one of the most profound gifts God has given to humanity, but it's also a weighty responsibility. It sets us apart, giving us the ability to make meaningful choices, experience genuine love, and shape our own destinies. Yet, the very freedom that enables love also opens the door to sin, suffering, and the possibility of separation from God. Some might argue that this freedom feels more like a trap than a gift. After all, the stakes are incredibly high. Why would God give us free will if he knew many would misuse it, bringing pain into the world and risking eternal consequences? To answer this, we must consider the nature of love and its connection to freedom. For love to be real, it must be freely chosen. A love that is forced or programmed isn't love at all, it's coercion. By granting us free will, God allows us to enter into a genuine relationship with him and with one another. This freedom elevates us, reflecting God's own nature as a being who acts with purpose and intent. However, with freedom comes accountability. Our choices have real consequences both for ourselves and for others. This is not a punishment but a reflection of the significance God has given to our lives. Every decision we make, from the smallest act of kindness to the gravest sin, contributes to the unfolding story of creation. Yet, God doesn't leave us to navigate this responsibility alone. He provides guidance through his word, his spirit, and our consciences, helping us discern the right path. When we fall short, his grace offers forgiveness and a chance to begin anew. Free will is a burden, but it's one we don't have to carry alone. Ultimately, free will is both a gift and a challenge. It elevates us by making our choices meaningful and our love authentic. At the same time, it requires us to grapple with the weight of our decisions. God, in His wisdom, deemed this freedom worth the risk, valuing our ability to choose love over the certainty of obedience. The question for us is, how will we use this gift? Will we embrace it as an opportunity to grow closer to God, or will we see it as a burden too heavy to bear? If the tension between free will and God's omniscience remains unresolved, how can we trust that our choices truly matter and that God's plans are ultimately for our good? The coexistence of free will and God's omniscience is a mystery that challenges our understanding of reality. However, the lack of a complete resolution doesn't diminish the significance of our choices or the goodness of God's plans. Instead, it invites us to trust in the depth of His wisdom and love. At the heart of this mystery is the idea that God's sovereignty doesn't override human freedom, it works through it. God's ability to know all things and accomplish His purposes doesn't mean He forces our decisions. Instead, He weaves our choices, both good and bad, into His greater plan. Like a master artist, He uses every stroke, intentional or accidental, to create a masterpiece. This mystery also reflects the limitations of human understanding. Our finite minds struggle to grasp how an all-knowing God can grant true freedom, but this doesn't mean it's impossible. Just as a child can't fully comprehend the actions of a loving parent, we may not fully understand how God's omniscience and our free will coexist, yet we can trust that He is both sovereign and good. The significance of our choices lies in their eternal impact. While God knows the outcome of every decision, He allows us to shape our journey. Our freedom gives us the opportunity to love, grow, and participate in His work. Each decision, no matter how small, carries meaning because it reflects our unique role in the story God is writing. Finally, the tension between free will and God's omniscience highlights the beauty of faith. Faith doesn't require complete understanding, it requires trust. Trust that God's knowledge doesn't diminish our freedom. Trust that His plans are for our good, even when we don't see.